it's official. So I get to say good morning to all of you on Pacific time. We're just getting it going, Pacific time. And good afternoon to all of you in Eastern time and Central time. Good afternoon. Good morning, good evening. And I'm hoping that you're ready for a fantastic couple of hours with us. I am Dr. Reggie Blaylock, and I am a fellow for Foster Care Youth Housing Initiative for Campus Compact. I want to thank you for joining us today for our coalition conversation on HUD and higher ed partnerships. So if you're in today, you are a part of the coalition. And what I get to do only on occasion, never enough opportunities to introduce some of my friends and colleagues that are working on this initiative. And when I say working, I mean they really put in the time, they put in the energy, they bring the best of themselves all the time. And I rarely get a chance to highlight them and thank them publicly. So I want to start with my dear friend, Cheryl Borgstrom. Cheryl is on here somewhere. I'm not sure where she is, but I see her. There she is. Wave to them, Cheryl, so they know the superstar of the superstars. Cheryl is the program analyst for the Office of Field and Policy Management for HUD for the Nevada State Office. We're going to give her some love, y'all. That's what we're going to do. Just a little round of applause for Cheryl. We appreciate you doing what you do, Cheryl. Thank you so much. And then Caitlin Radigan. She's the events and operations specialist for Campus Compact. And I call her manager of all things that are good, proper, and amazing. That is Radigan. And we're going to give her some love too, you guys. Put your hands together for Cheryl and put it together for Caitlin. And I ask you to do that because to do something meaningful and to do something good and to do something a little unusual, you got to have meaningful people who are good people and willing to do something above and beyond what they normally do in their day-to-day. And so they've taken on working with us, working with me for the last year or so. And it's just so much work that goes on behind the scenes. All of us on these screens know that to get it done right, it's going to take some effort behind the scenes. So I want to just, again, take the time to thank my partners. Appreciate you all the time. Appreciate what you bring. And then the last introduction I want to make before we jump into our agenda is I want to just introduce you to the president that bears all the responsibility for all things that outcomes, good, bad, or indifferent. She makes it happen. And Bobby Large, she's the president of Campus Compact, which is the largest national organization dedicated to higher education, civic, and community engagement. There's over 500 member institutions in Campus Compact. So again, it's one of the largest in the country. And trust me, when you see her kind face and warm remarks, you better know there's some shoulders underneath them pads. There's some pads in the gym. There's some shoulders underneath there that carries a lot of weight and a lot of responsibility. And I just enjoy working with her all the time. I think many of you know Bobby, and if you haven't had the pleasure to do so, you better ask somebody because she gets it done. She gets it done. Bobby, I'm gonna have you do some welcome remarks and some updates. Let's turn it over to Bobby. Give us some love, y'all. Welcome her to the microphone. Take it off of mute.
Tell you what, it's like a hype person that you need for every one of these webinars. And I feel like we're all doing this a lot. It could benefit from having Reggie kick off every Zoom call that I know we all participate in. So I'm Bobby. I'm thrilled to be with all of you today. I see lots of familiar faces and names, but also lots of new names, which is like so exciting to me and this work. And I'm going to talk very briefly and then get out of the way so that we can get into this, because really the reality is, I think under Reggie's leadership, there's been a significant amount of progress made in a really short period of time on such an important issue. So when Reggie and I were talking about this webinar, he said, I think it'd be helpful for folks to have a little bit of a bigger picture and context of how this initiative kind of fits in to what Campus Compact is doing in terms of a partnership with HUD. And so I just want to give a little bit of information about that. And so I've been with Campus Compact for about 2 years, or just, I think last week was 2 years. And when I came to Campus Compact, one of those relationships that I was kind of in the midst of fostering in my previous role was with HUD, and particularly the field policy and management area of HUD. And this is really important to differentiate because there's a long history between higher education and HUD as a federal agency. And for those of us that work in higher education, a lot of that really centered on something called the COPSI program, which is the Community Outreach Partnership Center program. And that program that was really activated and being funded in the 90s and early 2000s really nested actually a lot of community and civic engagement centers across the country. A lot of civic and community engagement offices were born out of COPSI grants. That specific program sat in the Office of University Partnerships, which is a specific office in HUD. And so for years, I mean, decades really, I've been a part of conversations working in this field that says, like, how do we bring back this strong relationship between HUD and higher ed? Because that program hasn't been funded for almost 20 years. And it always came back to, how do we bring back COPSI? How do we reimagine how to get the funding and the program back up and running? And then about 2.5 years ago, prior to coming to Compact, I said, I think we have to approach this a little bit differently. You know, ultimately, the folks that are on this call from higher education, the folks that we work with every day at Campus Compact, these are people that are about action. These are people who are about really thinking about productively, what should higher education be doing and can be doing to address the most sticky challenges in our society and create just and equitable communities. And it came down to kind of realizing that maybe we're talking to one great part of HUD with the Office of University Partnerships, but what about the boots on the ground part of HUD? What about the folks that are in our local communities that universities and colleges should be connecting to? And that landed us with field policy and management. And at the time, Michelle Perez, who has moved on, but her team that we're working with consistently. And I must say, it's been so rewarding to really begin to unpack with that part of HUD. What would it look like to really foster greater connection and collaboration between local housing authorities, as well as field policy and management and the national staff and colleges and universities? And this isn't going to surprise anybody on this call. There wasn't a lot to work with. Like when we started that conversation, trying to kind of raise up the examples, they were lacking. And for lots of reasons that we've been working on this specific area on foster care youth to figure out, but that was really how this started. This sense of how do we draw better connections between HUD, particularly around the local of working on the 64 field offices and the public housing authorities to think about what would it look like to create better connection and collaboration between those agencies, local, regional, and then at the national level, and colleges and universities, particularly through the lens of civic and community engagement. And with that, we created this HUD think tank, of which Reggie got involved in early, and at the time he was at Cal Poly Pomona. I see Josh Vanek on here from Montana Campus Compact, who's an incredible colleague who's also on that group. I don't think I see anyone else who's on the think tank, but I could be missing. And this group came together, and you know, like many things, that's a big mission. Like, hey, we're trying to draw better collaboration between this huge federal agency that does so much work on the community level in higher education. But within a few weeks, Reggie reached out and said, hey, can we talk one-on-one? And Reggie said, I'm here to be a part of these conversations, but I have a very specific interest. And my very specific interest is addressing the crisis and the challenge we have around foster care youth and the 3% national, broadly speaking, national graduation rate. And I want to talk about what I'm doing here at San Diego State and what happened with Guardian Scholars. And I was like, Reggie, oh my gosh, we worked together and we put times together and previous names. And I'd been at San Diego State in 2004 and immediately faced a name, remembered Reggie, and knew, like, had followed a little bit of that program. But I can tell you 20 years ago, there was no one who was a better champion for student success and ensuring that students get what they need holistically than Reggie. Even prior to the Guardian Scholars existing, I saw that in the other programs he ran at San Diego State. So we quickly talked. He said, I think there's a path here. We have something that's working at San Diego State, and it's exciting to see some of his partners here from the San Diego Housing Authority. And we're not seeing that replicated across the country. So that was, in like crazy terms, I mean, like probably 18 months ago or less that we had that conversation, and then began to say, like, can we start to kind of have some conversations? Cheryl got involved at that point when we talked to HUD and said, we really need a champion. We need somebody on your team who we can be in coordination with. And from there, it's just been incredible to see in a very short period of time, and in all true honesty, without any resources, what we've been able to accomplish. But I want to name, it has not been on my shoulders, which these days do feel heavy, but that's mainly because I have a middle schooler and a kindergartner, but really because of Reggie. And I know everyone who's working with him knows that he has been such a champion and force of nature for this work, but he has galvanized partners. And, I'm excited to learn from some of them. I'm going to have to watch a recording because I have to go do one of these, but without the kind of hype person of Reggie to kick it off in the next 20 minutes. But I'm excited. We've been talking, for example, about moving to work, and to have Jeree here, like, I'm excited to go back and listen about, like, how does this really translate? Because we've been talking internally around the real pathway here is working with moving to work in particular. And so I think today is going to be awesome to get an update for everybody on what's been happening. And I just saw Ryan pop up on his video, and gosh, just the incredible tiny conversations that have been able to take place with our community engagement practitioners in Nevada and others to really start to galvanize around what we know is a solvable problem. I think that's really it. Like, we know that we've got assets on the HUD side and assets on the higher education side. And in the middle, we have these youth and young people that need us and that need us to solve this and to do better. And so I'm excited that Campus Compact is making some progress with support from partners, and really appreciative to Reggie and the entire group here who's really doing a lot in a short period of time, but we've got a big vision. And I know that's some of what's going to come out today to kind of let everybody know what lies ahead.
Let's give her some love, y'all. Let's give her some love. Give her some love. We need it. Let me tell you that, look at that little red box where she is. That's what leadership looks like. That's what it sounds like. And that's what it feels like. Thank you, Bobby. We appreciate it. You have a good rest of your morning, and we'll check in with you. It's going to sound good when you look at the video back. I'm just telling you right now, okay? So let me jump in and talk a little bit about our conversation and what this sort of format is going to look like for the next few minutes. First and foremost, I need everybody on this call to feel and know that you are a valued member of our coalition. I mean, everybody here has to play a part. We need everybody's part, everybody's role, everybody's lens, the experience that folks brings to this conversation. I was talking to one of the presidents in the think tank last week, and he was saying, Reggie, I'm running an institution, but this is not my area of expertise. Fantastic. This is why you need to be on. Not just for learning, and let me assure you, in my 35 years of higher ed, teaching and being a vice president and blah, 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 I am learning all the time. Every time, not sometime, every time I talk to Martin, I'm like, now what, Martin? Tell me this again. Every time I talk to Jeree, I'm like, wow, man, give me that language one more time. These folks that we work with that are part of HUD, and part of the different agencies under that umbrella, they are so good and so experienced. You're going to meet some of these folks who are going to be on the panel a little bit later. But I hope you've had a chance to look at some of their background, some of their experience. They're unbelievable. I'll introduce them later, but I'm going to tell you later, they are the best amongst the best. We have on with us, working with us, the best amongst the best, probably in the world, certainly in the nation. But let me just say this. It's a conversation. This is not going to be a lecture. We're not about to talk to you and lecture to you. We want to have a conversation with our friends and our colleagues. It needs to be informal. It needs to be a comfort level that all of us can jump on and jump off. Feel free to put questions or ideas or thoughts in the chat so we can capture that if you have a question, or if you want to come off of mute, you can raise your hand or just jump in. I may not see your hands because I'm going 100 miles an hour. Caitlin's going to help me with some of that, but we want everybody to be comfortable jumping in, because none of us really, given where we are in terms of higher ed and where we are with HUD and these agencies, none of us are the experts on all things. If we were experts on all things, we wouldn't be where we are today. Our foster youth, we wouldn't be having this conversation about housing if we were all things to all people. So we're all in this to learn and share. We share because we care, and that's what this space is. So please feel free. About the last hour or so, we're going to shift to panel, mainly so that you can ask questions. questions about ideas, thoughts, learn, gather some information. So we are going to shift at some point where we're going to have the panel talking and we're going to feed them some questions. Now, let me say this. We're going to feed them some questions, but again, nobody knows everything about everything. We'll get the best from the best. Is that okay? Are we all right so far? Any questions so far before we jump in? Let me see. Kay Duffy, how we doing, Kay? So far, so good. Can you hear you, Kay? Come off mute.
Yes.
Okay, Kay, we good?
Yes.
All right, what about Maria? Maria Brains, are we good?
Yeah,
You're
we're
on
good.
mute.
We're
good,
good.
Maria?
Yeah.
Okay, am I good? Am I good so far? Am I good? Am I pocket square, Maria? We're good?
You're very good. You're very good. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, cool. Okay, all right, good. All right, thanks so far. Thanks so much. So I want to jump in and talk a little briefly about and review the retreat structure and outcomes, right? We had a retreat November 2nd and 3rd, 2 days. We had members of the think tank from across the country, public institutions, private institutions, foundations, nonprofits, multiple housing authorities were a part of the retreat, from moving to work agencies and other HUD, representatives from field policy and management, and the supervisory housing program specialist team. We had a great cross section of professional folks. So we asked them all at that time to bring your time, bring your energy, bring your expertise, and most importantly, bring your care and concern, which you bring every day to do this work, to have this conversation. So we had a great 2 days. Most of you have seen the document. If not, we certainly have it available for you to take a look. But we were developing some outcomes, right? Outcomes around these conversations, around suggestions, ideas, where are some of the obstacles, that kind of thing. And so today we want to hone in on some of that. We want to talk a little bit more about that to get more thoughts, more ideas, and how to move these conversations forward. So with that, I want to say this. I've been asked why, from different folks, either in higher ed or from different HUD agencies. Reggie, why do we need to have this conversation around foster youth housing? Isn't that taken care of by the state, or isn't that taken care of by the university? I had a colleague ask me, does the university have scholarships that cover this? And my answer, pretty emphatically is no. No, it's not taken care of by anyone. So let's take a look. I came across a document. Caitlin, I'm gonna ask you to pull this up. Just a brief review, just to give you some context a little bit around some of this. A brief review on housing, and particularly I'm looking at by state, right? So this is what it looks like. Some of you may be familiar with it. I just don't know if everybody is. But as of 2023, 35 states offer some type of post-secondary education tuition waiver or a scholarship. 35 states. Of that group, 24 offer a statewide tuition waiver. 24 tuition waiver for public institutions. And for some states, they'll offer a stipend versus a tuition waiver for private institutions. But that stipend is never going to cover all of the tuition at a private institution. And then 4 states of that 35, 4 offer some type of state-funded grant, like a grant program, which typically is available on a first-come, first-served basis, which means they annually run out of grants. When it's first-come, first-served, that means everybody ain't being served. And then we have 7 states that have some type of just scholarship. So not every state offers something. 35 offers something, but let me be clear, no states offer anything related to housing that we're aware of. I've been doing this work for some time, and no states offer housing. So I think the perception sometimes, maybe even the myth sometimes, is that because there's some coverage some resources available in some locations around tuition, many times people think tuition also includes housing, which we know it doesn't. And I will say this as a parent of two college graduates, two daughters, one just graduated a year ago. I know the difference between tuition and housing personally, and they ain't the same. And there's two different bills that come. So I just want to make sure we have at least that context around tuition availability, but being clear of the why we're having this conversation. And we can make this available to you. And it's looking at one page, but the page it goes into great detail. It's a document that goes into great detail by state. And so if you want it, we can provide it to you post this conversation. We can make it available to you, of course, free of charge. Okay. Thank you, Caitlin. Other reasons we're having the conversation is that we know that in order to do this work, we have to create partnerships, as Bobby was just talking about, between higher ed and our HUD agencies in order to expand the services to our most vulnerable populations. So again, I'm just want to provide some context for the conversation, and not just this conversation, but all of our conversations. We are not gathering, putting in our time and energy because we're here to criticize. That's not our purpose. Our purpose is to celebrate, honor the work that's being done every day by the folks that work in higher ed and those folks that work in these public agencies. And let me tell you this, as I've learned I've been working with our HUD partners for almost 10 years. Every day that I learn a little bit more, I have a much deeper appreciation for the work that they do. I am humbled every time I talk to Marin. I'm humbled every time I connect with Jeree and Cheryl and Nancy. I mean, Maria, these folks have decades of experience of being out there. I'm gonna just say this really quickly before I jump right in. We had a meeting last month in January, and we were talking with our colleagues from Nevada and some other locations about partnerships with the institutions, with UNLV, Nevada, Reno. We're all together. And my dear friend Cheryl, who's our liaison for HUD team assigned Cheryl Borkstrom, who you met earlier, to be our liaison and help us navigate the organization. So when we got on the Zoom, I saw a picture of Cheryl from her phone. And I was thinking, why is she on her phone? Well, she had on a scarf and a hat and gloves. I live in San Diego. I don't see no glove. What are gloves, right? She had on gloves and a big jacket. And I said, Cheryl, tell me, where are you? She goes, well, today we're counting. And I'm thinking, did she say accounting? She goes, no, counting. What does that mean? She said, Reggie, we're out here. I've been here since 4 this morning, and we're counting homeless people here on the streets. And we want to make sure they have the resources they need. So we're counting, we're doing some assessment, and we're checking on what their needs are. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity to count. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity for us to meet. So I'm going to take the Zoom while I'm here on the streets doing that this morning. I was literally almost in tears because I'm thinking, you don't want to miss the meeting with us. But at the same time, you've been on the streets since 4 this morning, addressing the needs of the homeless community, underhoused. Are you kidding me? Who are you, Cheryl? Is this what you do? So I'm saying to us, those folks who work in higher education, who we don't necessarily know or understand or not have the privilege of being in those spaces, this is what they do every day. So we would not dare criticize anything that's being done or not being done in order to be in this conversation. So this is about expanding the reach. There's no criticism about what's not being done, but how can we do it differently? How can we work together? How can we honor your work and celebrate what you do and support what you do, and conversely? So I just want to point that out. I hope Cheryl don't mind me telling that story, but it's something that I learned from her through her lens. Vaguely got a little brief glimpse through her lens of what she does and what they do. So with that said, I want to jump in and talk a little bit about that document. And I want to jump in and talk a little bit about, I want to start with the, what do I have listed here? I want to start with the Moving to Work program, and better known as MTV. And Jerry, I apologize, I use the word program. It's not a program, it's an agency. Okay, and Jerry and I were talking a day or two ago, and he was like, okay, Reggie, this is really good, important. You gotta understand, this is an agency, not a program. I'm learning, Jerry, be patient with me. The Moving to Work agency, and understanding this is a space that we launched several years ago in San Diego, working with the San Diego Housing Commission and Nancy and Maria's team and San Diego State. I know Brian is on. Brian oversees he's assistant director for educational opportunity programs, and Brian oversees the Guardian Scholars Program, which we launched in 2007. But in 2015, 2016, we launched a partnership with the San Diego Housing Commission. And that partnership was focused on providing resources to support the Guardian Scholars Program foster youth, housing specifically. And so under the Moving to Work agency, they were able to create this partnership because, as Jerry has given me some language, and so I want to make sure I get it right, that program is designed to test strategies, right? To test strategies in their local area, working, with institutions and organizations and how they can do some things differently. Now, many of us know that the Moving to Work program, there's been 5 cohorts. And I'm gonna let Jerry describe those purposes for each of those cohorts. But I think we're gonna have 129 Moving to Work programs where we are now. There may be a few more added because in December, there was a deadline that HUD, that housing authorities could apply for the Moving to Work agency. And they haven't announced how many were accepted, how many new ones that'll be coming about. They haven't announced that just yet, but we know December was the deadline for new applications. So there could be more than 129 going forward, spread across the country. And we can share more information about the Moving to Work program and where they're located, in which states, and things like that. So, Jerry, I know my language is a little jumbled, but I want to make sure I get it right.
Yeah. Thanks, Reggie. As you were saying, we are a demonstration. So our Moving to Work office in HUD, it's kind of a misnomer in the name. Obviously, it doesn't have everything to do with moving to work. We are an office that helps PHAs with the Moving to Work designation, if you will, kind of facilitate ways to help other populations needing housing. So in this instance, foster youth. So we allow them essentially some waiver relief from the standard rules that PHA may have to operate under, so they can kind of implement some of those local strategies that they might not be able to otherwise. So as Reggie was saying, currently we have 125 agencies, and we're going to expand to a total of 139. So we have one more cohort that has just closed, the 5th cohort, which will onboard the remaining 14 agencies. Those cohorts will study different things, 2 of which is just the general flexibility of MTW. So some of the things that we've seen our agencies do still are centered around housing that applies to all PHAs. So let's say annual recertification dates for rent renewals. But in other instances, there's a cohort that studies landlord incentives, trying to incentivize landlords to rent to voucher holders. And another being asset building, trying to improve the credit and the saving history of our residents. And the last being, oh goodness, it's a work requirements. Excuse me, not work requirements, stepped and tiered rents. 2 different models that HUD is looking to study to kind of inform our decision as we look to find more strategies that we can apply or spread it throughout the nation. So as I said, right now we're at 100 125 agencies nationwide. So we might have representation in your areas. I know this is pretty spread out group there, but we are basically kind of an avenue to help facilitate in this whole approach in housing foster youth.
Well, and I'll say this, given my basic level of experience a decade ago, when I was having the conversation with our colleagues from the Housing Commission, and I was learning about what Moving to Work was trying to accomplish. And my thinking around higher ed in general was this, that our foster youth, by the sheer nature that they're enrolled at the institution as full-time students, right? They're in a training program, an academic setting, but they're in a training program. We bring them in. We know they can't stay with us forever. We love our kids. We love them, Brian, Spencer. We love them, but you can't stay, right? Our goal is to get you graduated, get you certificated with your degree, and then you're going to transition away from the organization, to transition away from the institution as a graduate, and the idea is that you're going to be employable and be able to be self-sustaining. That's the idea, versus being homeless or being on the streets, right? So in Moving to Work, and my understanding is, I looked at it just in a generic sense, really generic. The idea is that HUD is trying to move folks into a space, a training program, whether it's certificates, whether it's other types of training that they can document and develop a skill set for a set period of time, whether it's this many, 6 years, 8 years, whatever the period of time it is. And then at the end of that period, they're going to be able to transition into our society as an employable, prepared adult person. Well, my thinking was that, Moving to Work fits perfectly with the university. It fits perfectly with our colleges, because that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish. And so this could be a good marriage, if you would, in terms of working together. And to the credit of the team, to the credit of Nancy's team and Maria's team, they took a chance, which had never been done. They took a chance and said, after they did their due diligence, right? Looked at, procedures, process, documentation, all the things that come along with this naturally, that they agreed that this could work. And Brian can speak to this more so from an institution standpoint, but when you look at this is all about completion, right? Graduation rates. When you look at the graduation rates in California, they're pretty consistent with the nation. They're about 3.5%. 3.5% graduation rate from a university for foster youth. And at the university now, Brian is hitting 80%, sometimes 83%. The graduation rate is unbelievable, but it's the structure of support. The housing piece is the critical component, but it's the other wraparound services that we know our students transitioning out of foster youth need, these other supports that the university can build in and support. The wraparound, all the basic needs are addressed, those kind of things. So I just want to say, just conceptually, because Moving to Work may be new for some on this call, brand new, that you understand that the idea of how this should be working and why we think this could work. And so I just want to point that out. Let's stop and take some questions before we go a little bit further and talk a little bit more. Any thoughts, ideas, questions so far?
First of all, this is amazing. I wanted to get real quick. Where did you say the location was with the 83%?
Well, first tell us who you are. We got to know who you are.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Heidi, Adelheid, but yeah, Heidi. I don't know what else
And
to
Heidi,
say.
Heidi, are you with West Virginia?
Yes, I emailed you because you're amazing.
Oh, you're so nice.
And I'm a PhD candidate just getting started. So I'm really interested in the relationship outcomes between foster care, wardship, and higher education.
We got to take those that are just getting started. We need everybody along the road. Everybody, whether you've been doing it a long time, in the midst, or just getting started, we need your lens and we need your perspective, because if you're just getting started, you are the future of this conversation. Okay.
Thank you. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So you asked where was this at?
Yeah, I'm super familiar with the 3%, but I think you said 83, and I want to write that down because that's amazing.
Brian, can you jump off of mute?
Yes, sir. What would you like me to tell you?
She want to know where you're from, B.
I'm from the one and only San Diego State University.
Okay.
You know? Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah,
oh,
that
you
number that Reggie was talking about, that's where we have 83% of our students have either graduated or currently enrolled, and it is actually comparable and sometimes even higher than the general population here at the university. So very proud of our students.
I'm gonna email you. This is amazing. You're amazing.
Well, and let me just say for the record, some really smart, really cool person hired Brian. That'll be me. I'm just saying. years ago, I had no gray, and Brian had a much bigger fro back then. So I'm just saying. So, yeah. So, any more questions? I'm taking a pause for the cause. We're going to keep that conversation going. And I say this because let me just say this. Maybe we can show it later. I'm not sure if this is the right time. What we've done is we are putting together a spreadsheet of all the moving to work programs in the country by state. And what we're doing is we're identifying a contact person for the agency, but also universities within, let's say, 30 miles or so, colleges within 30 miles, so that folks can begin to look at where potential partnerships could be developed. Because, and Jerry, I mean, they have it on their website. If you can Google, moving to work programs in the United States, they'll all pop up. And it's, I mean, it's very extensive. But we're trying to put this together. So again, so folks can look at, because let's say you're in a moving to work program, you work in the moving to work agency. You may not know what universities may be near you. So it's not just for university folks. We're trying to put together some of this information, some of this data for everybody to make it easier to access some of this. Caitlin, should we show this now, or do we wait till we get to the panel?
Sure. No, I think that works.
Okay.
Yeah, so as Reggie was mentioning, Campus Compact, this is just a kind of a snippet screenshot of the database that we've put together of moving to work agencies and where those line up with Campus Compact institutions within a 30-mile radius.
Yeah.
So really looking at exploring some potential partnerships there.
Yeah, and if you'll notice, all of the moving to work agencies are attached to a public housing authority. So some of you may be familiar with the public housing authorities in your region. Some of you may not, but they all are associated with a public housing authority. And just so we get the context right, there's over 3,000 public housing authorities in the nation. But as Jerry just pointed out, only 125 moving to work programs right now, which is going to grow to 139. So clearly not all of the public housing authorities have a moving to work agency associated with their work. So that's why we wanted to make sure you at least see some of this. Again, this is just a snippet of a much larger document, but it gives you some idea of the institutions and organizations and contacts and things like that. Okay.
Reggie, can I just make a clarification real quick?
Yeah, please.
So these are public housing authorities with the moving to work designation. So it's not a program that like they would have separately. That it's just the agency themselves is designated as a moving to work, but still a public housing authority.
Yeah. I'm never going to get that down, Jerry. I'm going to say it wrong every time I say it. So I appreciate you always helping me learn the language. And and Jerry knows I'm doing my best. I'm trying my best to get some of the language down, but it takes time, and I'm learning all the time. So I appreciate your patience and understanding that designation. And that's what I struggle with, that as a designation. But fortunately, we have some great folks on board with us. I'm going to shift over. Thanks, Caitlin, for pulling that up. The other area in our conversation, our conversation that we had in our retreat, focused around some other areas that I want to jump into, and we're gonna have time during it when we get to our panel to take more questions and frame this in different ways. But we had some conversations around the housing choice voucher, which many of you may know, the housing choice voucher, formerly known as Section 8. Many of you have heard of Section 8 all over the country, but it is now referred to as the housing choice voucher. And so let me see if I get my language right. I may not get it right, Martin, so you got to be ready, okay? I may not get it right. So under the housing choice voucher, there are a number of programs, but one of the programs underneath there that we're focused on is the special purpose voucher. We like the special purpose voucher under the housing choice voucher. And under the special purpose voucher, under that umbrella, there are a couple of programs that we've been focused on, particularly the foster youth to independence voucher. And also there's a family unification voucher, but we've been really focused on the foster youth to independence, which is under the special purpose, which is under the housing choice voucher. I'm not sure, Marn, did I even get it close?
Right on. You're right on.
Ooh, ooh.
I see Maria and Nancy nodding. So if you have the housing
Right.
authorities nodding, you're saying it right.
Okay. All right. And because I've done that, I'm letting you know right now, my gray hair is going back to black. It's going back. Gray hair going back to black if I get that right. Okay. If I don't get it right, it's going the other way. I'll be looking like Obama by the end of this conversation. Okay. It's going to be all gray by then. Okay. So let me just say that. So I just want to, again, context, because I'm still learning this, and I suspect many of my colleagues that work in higher ed are learning this as well. The relationship between these agencies and resources and where some of the focus is. I'm not sure if any of our colleagues are on from the Penn State higher ed system, Pennsylvania State higher ed system, but I've talked to folks from that higher ed system and housing authorities in Pennsylvania, and they were sharing with me in 2021, they were in this conversation between the higher ed system and the housing authorities in the region, and they couldn't get far enough in the conversation to understand where resources and opportunities may exist. And COVID was hitting, and it all kind of fell apart, to say the least. People left the agency, things like that. So they never got the movement. And some of it is not understanding the language and the relationship between programs and agencies and designations. How about that, jury? Toss that out there. And designations, okay? So it's understanding some of this and having time to put into it and that kind of thing. So I want to say this. I mean, I can't say it strongly enough, but Maren has been really patient, and her colleague Ashley, some folks from this particular area, the supervisor. Hold on, let me make sure I get my language right. They work in the supervisory housing program specialist, housing voucher management and operations division. Whoo! Put an acronym on that. The first time I saw the acronym from Mars, I was like, who the what? Where are you? In Mars, on the moon? Where are we going? I mean, I couldn't. So it's they work large agencies, right? Across the country. And so needless to say, we've been in a conversation because when you look at some of the language, right, around, let me back up and say historically, I want to start with that. Historically, there's been no housing vouchers usage on college or university campuses because of the language around no dormitories. There's some language in that requirement that says no dormitories. I don't know how long it's been around, but a lot longer than me and Martin. Okay, and so the interpretation, what I described is that language has overshadowed areas where we can find agreement on access to housing vouchers and eligible living spaces on our university and college campuses. Because we know today, right? Universities everywhere, colleges everywhere. We don't just have dormitories, right? The traditional dorms. We stopped building traditional dorm spaces probably 40 years ago, 30 years ago. We know we needed options. Students needed options for living. And so we've built apartments on campus, and students live off campus in apartments and houses for that matter. So dormitories, and we know today from a residential education standpoint, that not all students should be in a traditional dorm. And we don't really want our juniors and seniors really living with freshmen. Freshmen need to have a new, fresh experience as freshmen. But if you're in your third or fourth year, you're not in that space. So programming and development and training, it looks very different for a freshman versus somebody who's in their third or fourth year. So we know we have other spaces. And so we've been in a conversation with Maren and their team around other spaces, around housing for other spaces that would be eligible for the housing voucher. And this is brand new. This is some new conversations and new language. And so with that, I want to ask Maren to lean in just a little bit to talk a little bit about what some of that looks like, because I will say this, you know, a couple of, well, I won't get into details yet. So let me take a pause, and I'll let Maren jump in and see if she wants to add anything.
Sure. Thanks, Reggie. So I think one of our challenges, right, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which many of you are familiar with, 2.3 million households nationwide. It's the largest assisted housing program that we have. And we know that this is a resource that this population could tap into and use, right? We also have some regulations, some statutes and constraints around how vouchers can be used. So when my colleague Ashley and I were talking with Reggie, instead of maybe focusing on, hey, these are prohibited housing types, we cannot use housing choice vouchers in dorms, right? Let's focus on where we can use housing choice vouchers. Let's focus on what the sort of baseline requirements are. Like, you have a lease with a landlord. It has to be, you know, a 12-month lease to start, right? So that means that maybe some college campuses, maybe some on-campus housing or near campus, off-campus housing meets those criteria, right? And so I think we need to start thinking about this in a way that is creative, in a way that thinks, okay, where are those housing options that maybe a housing authority can go out and talk to and partner with some of these institutions to say, this is a great option if you are, you know, in this particular cohort and age group and demographic group. We have these partnerships, you get the support, you'd be in this campus community. So I think there are options there. It's just thinking about it in a way and exploring it in a way that is, okay, how can we make this fit? How can we make this resource fit? Yeah. Reggie, you have questions, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so let me add this, right? The whole purpose, when the Secretary of HUD asked to form this think tank, the whole idea was to think about things a little bit differently. Think about how we could be partnering to have a much stronger, further reach. And that's why I celebrate Maren and Ashley in these conversations for their willingness to think about things a little bit different. And as she mentioned, you know, we were talking about things like, as she mentioned, a lease, right? What university doesn't lease their space? Everybody provides a lease. And I know in California, I can't speak for every state, but I know all of the public housing in California at universities are able to offer a 12-month lease. Students don't have to, students say, I want a 9-month, that's fine. But if you want a 12-month, it's available. And back in 2010 or 2011, when I was chairing this for the system, I met with all of the directors of housing about this. They all said to me in one room, Reggie, we absolutely can do it. We just didn't know we had the need. We didn't know we needed a 12-month lease, but we can certainly offer it. And of course, not just did foster youth benefit from it, but international students, student athletes, many others have benefited from the option if they want to have a 12-month lease. The other thing that Martin and Ashley pointed out was that they need that the meals to be billed or identified as a separate cost. Well, we know today that every university offers multiple meal plans, right? You want 10-week, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, declining balance, you don't even want a meal plan at all. We know that we can provide that. It's automatic. No university automatically puts in a meal plan with no choices for students, right? That's just not how we work today. So that's something that we can certainly do to meet their needs. And then one of the other things they talked about was it needs to be fair market rent, right? You can't charge foster youth something much higher than all the other students in the market, things like that. Well, we can demonstrate that. Universities demonstrate that all the time. And who would dare say, oh, because you're a foster youth and you're getting a voucher, we're going to charge you much more, significantly more than any other student? What? That would, that wouldn't happen. And then they have, which they should, right? Normally inspections, right? You got to have running water, toilets, locking doors. I mean, there's things around the facility itself that needs to meet those standards. But I can say this, when we were developing the partnership with the San Diego Housing Commission back in 2015, these were the exact same standards that Nancy and Maria's team was having with the campus. They literally came to campus and we walked the spaces and showed them so they wouldn't have to take our word, right? First of all, we're a state public institution, right? We can't have standards that are illegal, right? We can't offer some things that don't make any sense, but we want them to see the space and make sure so they would know to launch this and support this, that we are absolutely in compliance. So I don't think there's, honestly, I'm not looking at the language side by side, but I don't believe there's anything in the language around the special purpose vouchers in terms of facilities requirements that's different from what we're already doing with the moving to work agency. I would suspect those standards are fairly much the same. I don't know that, but I believe that based on what I've heard. So this is my applause, right? Is that we're in a conversation that we haven't been in before. We're in a space around the special purpose vouchers and specifically the foster youth to independence voucher that could be really potentially available that we just haven't been in that space before, given right the location, the type of housing that Mom was describing. I think we can meet those expectations in many cases, but it takes conversation.
Reggie?
It takes learning. Please, yeah. Let me see the pause, please.
There was a comment I liked in the chat that I would like you to address. It said, from
Please.
Penny, it said, one of the problems with using this HUD form of housing is that many of these foster kids are going to college in areas that have their own challenges, with finding housing for the rest of their residents. So there are fewer possibilities to find it. Plus,
Yeah.
how many colleges actually have this type of housing available in the first place? As
Yeah.
far as food plans, many colleges require a minimum food plan that even in that form is too expensive. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've seen those problems, but.
Yeah, so a couple things I want to address with respect to that, and I believe this is important. And again, I'm gonna speak for California. In California, years ago, we prioritized housing for foster youth at all of our public universities. You got to meet the deadlines, right? You got to meet the deadlines and identify what space you need. But we know that the most vulnerable students entering our institutions is this particular community that we're talking about. So we make sure that the access issue is addressed in these conversations. And I think it's incumbent upon all of our universities across everywhere, right? When we start talking about access and vulnerability and retention and graduation, you got to start someplace. So this might be a space and a reason to start those conversations if you don't have something like that in place. So, and so that's why the partnership piece is important. And I say this, and I mean this sincerely, and I'm not saying this to be negative. I'm saying this out of sincerity. that if we're going to be, if higher ed is going to be a partner, we have to be what I call an active partner, meaning we got to look at ourselves and say, what are some of the things that we need to do to bring this to the table? We got to look at our own policies and procedures, not just look at their policies and procedures, but what are our own? And how are we stepping up to meet the needs of these communities, particularly our most vulnerable students? So, with respect to that piece around the access piece, again, look at your deadlines, look at your policies. Do you have a 12-month lease? If not, why not? And usually the answer is, we didn't know we needed it. And then secondly, the access piece. Why wouldn't we want to have a conversation at our institutions around how do we meet the needs of the most at-risk students we have at the whole institution? I mean, you can argue with me as long as you want about there's other students that have that are vulnerable, right? But who's more vulnerable than former foster youth, wards of the court, unaccompanied minors, homeless students? We put those in all in the same space. All in the same space. Now, most universities, I'm not saying this to be critical because I played football for 4 years in college, but most universities prioritize housing for athletes. I rarely heard of a campus that says we have student athletes and we don't have housing for them because they prioritize space up front. And I would argue if we already have the practice in place, which we do, then it's just a matter of expanding the practice, perhaps just a little bit. And we're not talking about thousands of students, right? We're talking about a small fraction of the enrolling students. So the other part around meals, and I think I heard that the meals are a requirement. The issue, so just so we're clear, is separating the cost. There has to be some clarity with respect to this is what the housing costs and this is what the meals cost. That has to be, and I think every lease, every contract does separate the two, I believe. And if not, it's not hard to do. Again, we have to look at our practices. Every student should be informed on what they're paying for, right? What is your housing cost and what is your meal cost? And so, Martin, let me ask this, is there some support, potential support built in around students eligible for housing, right? That we got the right apartment, the right style. Could there be meal costs supported as well?
So from HUD, no.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean, right, that the provider could not partner with other, often the child welfare agencies, if these are youth who are eligible for Chafee funding or education and training vouchers. A lot of different Children's Bureau funding sources can sort of be braided together, for lack of a better word, or to steal a word from our homeless provider friends, to really kind of understand how to support these students in a robust way. So it's really just kind of navigating those community partnerships, which we know is challenging in its own right. Yeah.
But you point out the fact that by identifying these costs, these separate buckets, there's the potential for additional support from some other areas. But at the same time, I think, again, I can't speak for every state in the union, but I think in most locations that those costs must be identified separately contractually, even if you have to pay for a meal plan. Because some campuses, for first-year students in particular, they do want them to have a meal plan because they don't want them to be starving. They want them to be healthy. So there's a minimum plan, maybe 10 meals a week. So some campuses have that. But again, I go back to all of our campuses, we have the ability to make exceptions for exceptional cases, for exceptional students. So again, having these conversations, but in many cases, folks haven't had the need to have the conversation. So we just do what we always been doing at our institutions, in our universities.
Reggie,
yeah, please.
There was another comment, if you don't mind me reading.
No, please, by all means.
Okay, this is from Josh, and he said, this is some of what I heard from a housing authority when I dug into this in Montana. Can you speak to these specifics from the SDSU Cal Poly experiences? So, and then he has this in quotes. So historically, the university has refused to participate in housing choice Section 8 rental assistance. The challenge, as I understand, is that Section 8 requires a lease of at least 6 months, in our case, 12 in most programs, and the tenant can only be evicted for cause. The university wants to be able to evict someone if they stop being a student. Also, university legal did not like the provision in our federally mandated contract that says our contract supersedes other contract provisions. The university is exempt from landlord-tenant laws, among other laws as well.
Can we add any more questions to that question? No, I'm just kidding. I don't even know where to start. My mind is racing. In Montana, what y'all doing? Okay, so where do we start with that? So sure, can you peel that back just a little portion at a time for us? Because that's like 6 questions.
Yeah, well, there was a lot. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'll just read the first part. It says,
Yeah.
So it says first, so historically, the university has refused to participate. Okay, so we got that. The challenge, as I understand, is, okay, so I guess the first one is that the tenant can only be evicted for cause. The university wants to be able to evict someone if they stop being a student.
Yeah. So let me respond by saying this. I'm a big proponent of data. And I like to start our conversations with data so that we are all on the same page with understanding the who and the why. Like, who are the students and why are we having the conversation? So in the case of Montana, as described, I personally, this has been my path for quite some time, start with who are your students? How many students do you have? What is their graduation rates? What is their continuation rates? And look over a course of a number of years so that you can sit down and provide some context for the conversation. Are we talking about 300 students a year or 10 students a year or 40 students a year? Are the graduation rates 7%, 80%? Because all of our institutions, and I'm sharing this with our HUD colleagues, all of our universities across the country, we are all deep into the student success conversation. We are deeply in the conversation around completion. What does graduation rates look like? Who's completing and who's not? And those that are not, why are they not completing? And those that are, why are they completing? So I would dare say that the approach, when we know the success and lack of success rates for this particular population at your institutions in Montana, when we start with that, then I would suggest it's very difficult to start with, we don't want to participate. Because if you keep doing what you've been doing, you'll keep getting the same results, right? You would say, do what you did, you'll get what you got. If you want something different, you got to do something different. So, again, if the objective is we're here to support the students who are not completing, then we got to frame it around that language and around that data. Because you can look at, right, again, other institutions, other states, information is available. No one is really more at risk than somebody else, no other institutions or states for that matter. But oftentimes we're very comfortable doing what we've been doing. And nobody's giving us a reason to change. Nobody's pushing us. I hate to use the word push. No one's positioning us to change because nobody's put the data out there. And then once that begins to happen, then I believe you start to see organizations start to shift the conversation.
Okay, there's a comment from Kathy that said, I think the Montana reference is asking a different question. The question is how to address policy conflicts and if California has found a way around it. Because that next question also did say the university legal did not like the provision in our federally mandated contract that says our contract supersedes other contract provisions. The university exempt from landlord-tenant laws as well. So yeah, did California have that problem when Nancy was working on that? So again, Kathy says, I think the Montana reference is asking a different question, that how to address the policy conflicts. Has California found a way around it?
Well, I can say this with respect to California. Well, let me back up and say this. The idea that they don't like it doesn't mean it. You can't build policy or practice around like, right? I mean, so that's different, right? What I'm hearing is, I'm not sure if there's a policy or a practice. And perhaps I'm hearing there's a practice, we don't like it, so we're not going to do it because we don't like it. So that's inherently you create a policy around a practice based on like. So the issue is, right, we've never done it before. And so we could be there could be some risk around evicting a student, but the landlord-tenant law says you can't, like there's a whole, you talk about a whole practice and policy built around the worst case scenario, right? So what if it happens once a year, but 15 other kids graduate because they have a housing voucher? So the whole practice is built around the potential, not that it's happened before, but the potential of a worst case scenario that I don't like what could potentially happen. So I do hear the question, but it's built around what ifs, maybes, and mights. And I can say, again, having done this for quite some time, I've not had anyone from legal say, we're going to lead our policies and practices around that. That's going to be the driver, because it could happen that this could be a challenge around some student that's got evicted. Now, I'm just saying it's not impossible, but that's not what we've led with. It just hasn't been what we've led with. So I go back to data, and again, how do you, I hate to use the word refute, but how do you respond to those conversations? Is, again, I go back to starting with data. Are we going to lead with the what ifs and the what I like and don't like versus the data? The data is telling us this.
Okay, Reggie, there's another
yes.
comment. Madeline said, because I don't understand why it would be a university's business to have eviction power if they don't own the voucher.
Hang on, sorry, that was part two. Yeah, the first part I was just saying is
Thank you.
maybe I'm just not as clued into the definitions of this. I work more with building out pathways to college. But if a housing unit is owned by the campus, is it automatically considered a dormitory? You know, you mentioned, Reggie, like we haven't built traditional dorms in a while. We colleges are now investing in suites and apartments, and then there's some sort of like public-private partnership stuff and campus affiliated housing. And I'm just wondering, definitionally, is anything university owned called then a dormitory?
No.
And so is therefore the workaround a university having a list of completely separate housing that might be amenable to the voucher system?
Yeah. So thanks for asking that. And the answer is yes. Well, make sure I clarify that. Not every living space that a university owns is called a dorm, right? We haven't called those spaces dorms for 30 years, right? We know what apartments are. We know what dormitories are, right? Dorms are the, I hate to use the term, where all the shared bathrooms, there's 30 people on the floor, they all share the same bathrooms and everything like that, right? One long hallway, those old spaces. And we know what apartments are, right? Very different. So no, not every university-owned, managed living space is a dorm. And we have definitions for those, right? We know what those are at campuses. So, and we can share those with our external colleagues, right? So, and to Marin and her team's credit, they know that too. I mean, when we're in the conversation, they're like, well, yeah, I mean, apartments would be different than dorms, right? So we know that, and we know how they're constructed. and why they're constructed, for those purposes. Is that helpful?
I was going to say, Penny, if you don't mind unmuting yourself and also voice your comments because they're really good.
Thanks, Madeline.
Okay, John, so, I'm not sure which one you're referring to, Maren. So, is it about the states changing, or is it about Rutgers, or what?
Whatever you feel, this is Cheryl, whatever you feel you want to make a comment that I didn't mention, because you had a lot in there. I didn't want to miss it. They were good. I don't want to miss any that you really want to
Well,
have Reggie here.
we work with two groups that are centered on helping foster kids. One at Rutgers University and one Roots and Wings. And many of these issues that you're bringing up that California deals with so effectively are not effectively dealt with here in New Jersey on a statewide basis or even at a university basis. And I think it's very difficult for people who are trying to advise these kids to navigate all of these different resources that keep changing their definitions or rules to apply to all the instances that especially foster children find themselves in. It runs the gamut from still having a contact with their foster families to completely being on their own or even being orphans. And so all of their needs, their basic life needs, are a challenge. And many of the universities have lots of other challenges facing them, and these children are getting lost in the, in the shuffle. So specific programs that are funded privately through the universities and other specific programs like Roots and Wings that are funded through donations are very effective at the small population of these children that they can reach. But A, their funding is limited, and B, because of privacy concerns at universities, many of these children are never identified as being in need because of their backgrounds. So they're left to flounder on their own. And so I don't know how that's addressed in California, Reggie, or in West Virginia to Adelaide, but in New Jersey, they talk a good game and they don't really produce. Except on these small specific programs.
Yeah, Penny, thank you so much for joining us today, by the way, and thank you for your questions. And I can't emphasize enough, underneath all of this conversation is, as we've been talking about from the beginning, it's about building a partnership based on collaboration, respect, learning, listening. That before you get into any of these things, we got to, first of all, we got to know each other. I'm a big proponent. People do business with people, not with names on the shirts, not with necessarily organizations. It starts with people connecting with people. And I believe that, right, we bring them on our campus and talk about our spaces, our students. We go visit them in their offices so we can learn about all the different programs that they offer and where partnerships might be able to.
I think that takes a lot of manpower, Reggie. I really do. And listen, I applaud you and the others on this call whose organizations, colleges, nonprofits have managed to navigate this. But Rutgers has over 52,000 students. Yeah. And they have 4 campuses. Many of their resource officers are overworked, underpaid, and find the navigation of all these rules and regulations, both on the university side and on the state side and federal side, to be very complicated. And quite frankly, they have other jobs to do, educating the students. So yes, everybody should be informed, but colleges really are not looking at the students in need, even students that haven't been in foster care. When you were talking about scholarships before, those scholarships may pay tuition, but there are
Right.
so many more basic life needs that are not addressed, and that causes more than 50% of them to drop out of school and never go back. And therefore they've incurred all of those costs, all of that time, all of that hope, and they have nothing to show for it but debts and
Well,
disappointment.
and Penny, and let me tell you this. I don't mean to make this sound like a snap, crackle, pop, but I will tell you, having done this myself personally, I spent a whole year in meetings, going to board meetings, taking people to lunch, and what I call the $10 investment. I invested $10 almost every month. 10 years ago, 2 coffees at Starbucks was $10. Now it's a $20 investment. You can't get 2 coffees at Starbucks for $10.
Well, we've
now.
been working in this field for 2 decades.
No.
And it has
I'm
taken
talking,
us this long, but it has
no.
taken us this long to get to the point where the university understands that 38% of their students are food insecure. They haven't even talked about
Right.
housing issues and needs
And
anyone else.
And Penny, I'm talking specifically
I
about
know, but you know what?
a meeting with the housing authority.
I'm a private citizen. I'm a donor to the school.
Yeah.
That the university will, I mean, I'm glad this is being recorded. I'll send it to everybody I know at all the universities that we work with. But I do think that when the federal government, like one of the ladies was talking about, when the federal government puts all these caveats on what they say they're doing for the greater good, and it keeps changing and shifting, and it's different for each state because the state may not implement it. The navigation of this is very difficult, and the time that you've spent is great, but I don't know who's paying your salary, honey, but there's nobody getting paid for that at Rutgers. So
well, Penny, like you, I'm a volunteer.
Yeah, Reggie, there was a good comment from I can't say her name. Adelaide, do you mind unmuting yourself? And
hold on. Before you
she's
jump
from
in,
West Virginia.
Yeah, before you jump in, Eileen, let me just say, Penny, thank you. Thank you for giving your time and your energy and your feedback, because we all need to hear also that it's not easy. And it does take time, but I will say, Penny, the more time I invest into learning about these agencies and organizations, the deeper my appreciation is. And I'm telling you this sincerely, I'm not deterred by the bureaucracy that you described. I'm not, because well, guess what? I'm gonna dig my pumps in deeper. Reggie ain't going away. I ain't going away, Penny, because the kids are counting on us.
Well, look up Roots and Wings. Look up Roots and Wings in New Jersey. They're an awesome organization making a difference for hundreds of kids.
And I can already see your roots and your wings. I already see yours, Penny.
That's not me, though.
Okay, Adelie. All right,
a shout out to Edith and Paul.
All right, thank you.
Thanks,
Adelie, please jump in for West Virginia.
Okay, honey.
Yeah, I'm attending West Virginia. I live in Missouri. And I just really wanted to say that sitting back and listening to the two of you speaking, it feels like two voices of the same coin. And it feels like, Reggie, where you're coming out with deep enthusiasm and excitement, and you're kind of recharging us and getting us invigorated. Penny, I feel like you have that same kind of passion too, except that it's coming from a little bit more of a critical lens. It feels a little bit like it's coming across as a little bit more harsh. And I just want to say that you're preaching to the choir. We're all in this with you. And I feel like that can be channeled in something really meaningfully. I promise it can be. So I don't want to discourage you, but I just think that can be rerouted in a pathway. What I feel like I was hearing from you is specifically that the confidentiality is a huge gap. I am in full agreement with you in that. I stand really at a weird intersection because I am a person who was quote unquote raised in wardship since infancy. So familial human sex slave trafficking was in my background, all kinds of stuff. And yet I'm moving into my PhD. And so I have this double lens of being an academic. And I do find that there's language barriers between institutions, between partnerships, between personnel, and also between individuals who might have this background and those people who could serve them. And so I'm in agreement with you about the disconnect in language there, specifically regarding accessing and providing support to this demographic. And for my part, I think that some of it comes through with representation. I think it comes through with lived experience and voices, and just sharing what you're passionate about to the community that might be listening to the message that you have that is worthwhile to listen to.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. Very
Yes.
very much appreciated.
Reggie, I don't know if I'm taking too much of your time, but Marin and Madeline have been having some good side conversations. I didn't know if they wanted to talk.
Well, here's the thing. We're getting ready to shift to our panel where we can get more of their thoughts and feedback. We're going to shift over into our panel now. But this is an opportunity for us to highlight some of our colleagues here on this Zoom. As I said before, they are friends and they are colleagues. And what I consider to be the best amongst the best, spread across our different organizations and organization types. And so I'm just so pleased to introduce them to you. We have 4 that are with us this morning and this afternoon. And so let me start by just saying that their more extensive background, that their bios are on the registration page, and you need to read it. You need to see more about who they are and what they've done and what they're doing. So impressive. Maria Christopher, she's the Vice President of Special Programs, Rental Assistance Division, San Diego Housing Commission. Nancy Sa, I got it right. Nancy Sa, Strategic Programs Manager for Strategic Initiatives and Homelessness, Innovations Division, San Diego Housing Commission. Marin Trachman, Supervisory Housing Program Specialist, Housing Voucher Management and Operations Division. And then Jeree Turlington, my twin. And Jeree is with the Moving to Work team, Office of Public Housing Investments. So thank you guys. Thank you, all 4 of you, for agreeing to give us your time, your energy, your expertise, and your lens. And so I just want to, get this comment. I just want to sort of kick this off a little bit with, again, to all of our colleagues that are on the Zoom, we're open for questions, comments, feedback, thoughts. You can put them in the chat. You can raise your hand or just come off of mute. All of it is welcome. All of it is welcome. And again, it's our time to listen and to learn and to share ideas and perspectives and feedback. We're trying to gather all of that. And so with that, I want to just sort of jump in and see, Martin, do you want to start? I think you had some things you want to share or some comments in the chat. I want to just give you an opportunity for that before I hit you with any questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to start with questions.
Okay, let me start with one just to get the conversation launched. So Martin, can you share where you believe are perhaps some of the greatest opportunities, which some of it we may have been talking about already, opportunities for partnering with institutions and housing authorities, where you think those opportunities may be for special purpose vouchers for eligible, obviously, foster youth with respect to housing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Reggie. I am actually fresh off of Youth Villages convening in Miami, where I got the privilege of hearing from a lot of youth with lived experience. And one of the questions that they raised was, what about if we want to go to college and we want to live on campus? What is there for us? And so I think this is such a timely conversation, and really excited to hear from Nancy and Maria and Jeree and others, like what has worked in their communities. So I think, first of all, like understanding that we have so much need for affordable housing, particularly among populations that are at higher risk, can be harder to house, right? We know every single year, 20,000 transition age youth exit foster care, and 1/3 to 1/4 of those risk experiencing homelessness after that time, right? And so I think from my perspective, we have resources, we have vouchers, we have this special, specific Foster Youth to Independence initiative, FYI, where housing authorities, as long as they have an active partnership with the local child welfare provider and others, right? We know that they need additional supportive services partnerships. That includes local institutions of higher education, right? That as long as they have that partnership and they have referrals of eligible youth, they can come in to us and get those vouchers, which is great, because we know often housing authorities have closed waiting lists. They have years-long waiting lists. And so just for us, from my perspective, it's getting the word out about the availability of this resource and making sure that housing authorities have that active partnership on the ground, so they're ready as soon as they get a youth who is eligible, who can use this resource, that they're ready to come in and apply for that. So I know we have a lot of work to do in terms of raising awareness of this resource and helping facilitate those partnerships so that this can be a smooth process from there.
Nice. Thank you. Any questions for Maren? I'm going to jump to some others, but I don't want to move away from what she just described. If there's any thoughts or questions with respect to what she just described. I do have something that comes to mind, and Brian or Nancy, you guys can correct me if I don't have it right, but Maren mentioned about waiting for them to come in and say, I need this voucher, right? Eligible youth coming in and saying, I need it. Well, in many cases, universities, right, because students apply, essentially a year in advance through the application process. And on the financial aid application, right, the FAFSA, there's a question that asks, are you or were you a former foster youth? And so universities can, I know San Diego State does, I know Brian's team does this, they flag those kids. And when they get admitted, they reach out to them proactively and say, we have a program that provides these supportive services. Are you interested? If the kids are, then they apply. And my point is, because now we've captured so much information from the admissions application, the financial aid application, the Guardian Scholars application, right? Application. I mean, we know who they are, and they're able to then provide a list to the housing authority of here are the eligible students, the criteria, all the things that they need. And so from an efficiency standpoint, in terms of operation, might this be an avenue, a way in which that we can communicate in terms of building partnerships, right? Again, this has to all be vetted out well in advance, process and procedures, timeliness and dates, all of those things, right? Which universities do, right? We're all built on deadlines and structures, right? You got a final exam today, you got to take your exam, right? We know all about deadlines and things like that. But Maren, is that something that we could explore, you think?
Yeah, definitely. So say that again, explore particularly like FAFSA or?
No, in terms of the university providing the information that your office would need, right? So if you say, Reggie, we need A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, which we do already for the Moving to Work program, right? Mm-hmm. So we already know, here are all the things that they need, the deadlines they need them by, and the way in which we transmit that information, rather than waiting, as you described, rather than waiting for a student to walk into your door to start the process, which now they're behind, right? We started well in advance before they actually arrive, so that when they arrive, everything's already in place, right? All the process and procedures have been addressed. They've met the criteria and everything's ready to go. Mm-hmm. Is that something you think would be open? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's sorting through that partnership, right? And data sharing in a way that makes sense.
Right.
Making sure that we're thinking about like, what would there be concerns around, you know, privacy
Yeah.
or like
Right, of course.
allowing that data
Right.
sharing, right? But thinking
Yeah.
through how institutions can do that better. We hear that all the time.
Yes.
At HUD, I'm sure the housing authorities hear it all the time. Like, hey, I just went to this other office. I gave them all this same information. Now I'm filling it out again here, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So thinking through
Right.
streamlining in those ways for sure.
And the reminder is, right, we're all subject to the same federal guidelines with respect to confidentiality, right? You know, at San Diego State, for example, 22,000 of the 27,000 of the 38,000 students get financial aid. So all the federal requirements around confidentiality, every university has to abide by. So I'm saying we have the same sort of standards, if you would, that may be implemented in different ways, but we're all striving for the same kind of goals in terms of supporting students. And that's why I asked the question, because one of the things we were hearing a few minutes ago was navigating the bureaucracy and how difficult that can be. But in a partnership where we're able to sit down and build that together to address your organizational needs, our organizational needs, and what are the dates and deadlines and things like that, it can all be done. I believe it can be done because I've already seen it done around that. And so I wanted to point that out. Questions for Mara? Y'all better get her. I'm telling you, because her calendar, oh my gosh, you better start thinking about what you want to talk to her about. Okay. Let me jump in and ask another question. Jeree, let me ask you this, with all due respect, and I mean this sincerely, regarding impactful services, many impactful services within the Moving to Work program. This particular initiative pertaining to higher education and foster youth housing is new, still new. You know, only in San Diego have we been doing it for a number of years, but it's still new, and therefore requires newness. Sometimes requires some change or shift on some level, whether it's human or fiscal shifts. How should we go about building this and sustaining this? What I mean, for those that are new on this, right, haven't done this before, what advice would you give them to begin building a partnership with their regional or local Moving to Work agency?
Thanks, Reggie. I would halfway ask Nancy and the San Diego team to answer this. But from my seat, being HUD and establishing those partnerships, I would say to reach out to the public housing authorities. That spreadsheet you sent out is probably super helpful with all the contact information. And I say to reach out to them just because this obviously is a good incentive of very importance to this group. But for the housing authorities, you know, it might be day to day, you know, completely out of their purview or something that they're aware of or really pursuing. So in establishing that partnership, you want to bring this to the forefront like you have to us, to the local housing authorities in your area to say, hey, how can we help serve more families in that way? And like I said, maybe in a split kind of answer with San Diego, they can kind of demonstrate a way to do that. But I would suggest going that route and directly contacting those folks on that spreadsheet.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I don't know if you guys can see this in your screen, but Nancy and Maria, they have capes on. Okay, there's capes behind them. They are super, super special, and they wear their capes. I'm just telling you, underneath their blouses sometimes. Any question for Jeree? Again, he's looking at it from a national standpoint, a big picture standpoint. And now I'm going to ask Nancy and Maria on a local standpoint. But let me pause and see if there's any questions in the chat. Okay. All right.
Reggie, are you going to move on to question 3?
I'm going right now. I'm going to Nancy.
Okay, before you go to question 3, then I'd like to just tag on to Jeree's comment. So I know Jeree mentioned it from kind of the HUD perspective on what they would like to see happen. And I'd like to kind of give the Public Housing Authority perspective on, you know, I know we've been saying this over and over again the last hour and a half, but the relationship building is very important and it takes a long time. And so I think regardless of if your closest public housing authority is a moving to work agency or a regular traditional public housing authority, it really is just knocking on that door and saying, hey, this is who I am. I'd like to discuss with you how we can work together to serve foster youth that, you know, attend our school or whatever it may be. Because there are different options. You know, Maren mentioned special purpose vouchers. There are certain things that we can do under moving to work. So kind of depending on who your housing authority is, there may be different avenues to explore. It's just a matter of kind of making that connection, and then understanding that, you know, public housing authorities work pretty slow, and we work kind of a couple years ahead. And so understanding that, like, even if there's like that connection there and we want to get started right away, it'll take time. And it may take a couple years to actually get something up and running, but making that kind of first step connection is very important.
Yeah. Thanks for that. You know, I've learned, again, just recently working with our colleagues in Nevada about them launching, you know, developing a partnership, about the time involved, right? You know, I'm thinking, well, let's go this year. They're like, well, it takes time. We got to build this in the budget. You know, we have to shift something. You know, so I do want to say this, if I got it right, Jerry. When a housing authority receives a designation, a moving to work designation, if I'm saying it right, with the resources, there's no additional staff. So you don't get like, oh, we have a moving to work program now in this area. We have new staff or additional staff is going to come with it to run it. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, an agency is pretty much staff with whomever they have. You kind of make best with the designation as they are able to.
Yeah.
So if I could, so the moving to work designation is kind of like a title that we get. So it's not actually like, we're still a public housing authority. We still have the same core functions. It's just kind of like, it's a flexibility that we have to be a little bit more creative with what we're given. But it's not like a separate program. It's not a separate kind of funding pool where we get more things. It's really just, you're still a public housing authority, but you have this new title, so you can be a little bit more creative to address your local needs. And so that's why in San Diego, we have, you know, housing affordability challenges, we have homelessness challenges. And so we use our moving to work designation to really address those local challenges.
Yeah. But it ultimately does mean more work, right? More work for the same number of people.
It does, and that's why, yeah, and that's why when you do, you know, it's not that the passion or the compassion isn't there. It's that, you know, we're still a public housing authority with our kind of core responsibilities. And so when we take on new activities or programs like our Guardian Scholars Partnership, we have to internally figure out, like, okay, how do we make this work? You know, where are we taking away from so that we can provide here? It's not like we're getting additional money just for Guardian Scholars. We have to figure out internally, how do we make our budget work for this?
Yeah. And I want to point that out because I want our higher ed colleagues to just sort of understand that that moving into this partnership space, even with the resources that you identified or the designation that you identified, it doesn't mean, well, it's going to be an infusion of staff to take this on and partner with you. So it means that those people who are doing what they've already been doing have to make room for additional partnering. And I just want us to have that understanding so that, as you mentioned, this takes time. It takes time because it's the same number of people doing what they've already been doing and adding a little bit more because it matters. And if we have that kind of understanding going into building a partnership, then perhaps we'll be maybe a little bit more patient, a little bit more understanding of how to build and building something that's important. It does take a little bit of time. Any questions? I'm going to jump in and ask a question for Nancy and Maria, but I want to just take a pause for the call, see if there's anything we want to add in here.
Reggie, can I just add something on this conversation?
Please.
And also to what Maren and Nancy had said. We do have the Guardian Scholars Program, which we developed out of our moving to work flexibilities. But those foster youth to independence are also an option. And the vouchers that are available to foster youth, many times you really have to work with your child welfare agencies in order to get those referrals into the Housing Commission. So it's really a good idea to really foster those relationships with the child welfare agencies, so that if additional vouchers do come through, like we're looking to apply for those foster youth independence vouchers, but we need to work very closely with our child welfare agencies so that we can get the referrals through them. And in a way, we're protecting confidentiality. And be able to assist those individuals. So I think in part of this in the higher education and looking at where there's availability for us to work with foster youth is not only in the moving to work, but also in those additional vouchers that are available, but including the child welfare agencies in some of these discussions, because it's
Nice.
very important for them to be involved. It's very important to have those wraparound services, which we see as being a challenge sometimes, because without those wraparound services, you see people kind of falling off. And it's real important that you have those with the child welfare agency. It's important to look in your own agency to see where could you supplement some of those services, like we try to do as well. So I don't want us to leave out that child welfare agencies are very important in this discussion as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Wow, that's great framing. Appreciate that.
And can I chime in too, Reggie? I just want to
Please,
make a quick distinction, right? We started talking about the Housing Choice Voucher Program and FYI. And because San Diego has this MTW distinction, they're able to do some things that are like, would be just like the ineligible housing types, right? Like campus and dormitory housing.
Yeah.
And so I think for this group's perspective, like looking at where do these other MTW agencies exist, right? Like you're doing, and saying, where do they have that flexibility? Like we can explore on the HUD side, different policy mechanisms if we have, where we have that flexibility in HCV, but would just note there is that distinction there. There is still that ineligible housing type of dormitory.
Right.
So I don't want anyone to get the impression like HUD's giving you the green light, go ahead and go do this, right?
Yeah.
That there are these sorts of like ways to think about and do this, and we're willing, we want to be involved and engaged in the conversation to figure out what that could look like. Juri.
Yeah, and I was gonna piggyback off of that. So a lot of our agencies are newer, and as Nancy had kind of expressed, like there is a lot of work that goes into structuring these programs, even with the flexibilities that we give you. So I would say kind of give grace to those agencies as they just kind of get acclimated to having the designation and doing some of the, what we would say, the baseline activities or flexibilities before they get to something like this, where it might require like their folks to have more bandwidth and establishing those partnerships or kind of fleshing out how to structure these activities just in general.
Yeah. And as Juri pointed out earlier, the whole purpose of the moving to work study was to look at areas in which these agencies could have more flexibility and develop, whether it works or not works, report back so they'll know long-term, right? If this is working, then we should, maybe down the road, something be permanent. But I think the first, if I'm not mistaken, Juri, the first moving to work program was in 1996.
That was when we were kind of mandated as a demonstration program. So a lot of the what we call initial agencies came on board from that act. Yes.
The OG, right? The original 39, right?
Yep.
The original 39 in 1996. And so, right, 39 out of over 3,000 housing authorities, right? So a very small number. And it's grown over the years. So now we're looking at maybe 139, but that's the idea. So they have more flexibility. I'm glad Martin pointed that out, that's that flexibility under the moving to work program is not the exact same as what she was describing for HUD. HUD is, this is the way we've been. Moving to work give those designated areas, those designated programs, those designated agencies more flexibility.
So I would say if you are really thinking about approaching your public housing authority, it's kind of like ask yourself a couple different questions, right? So is that public housing authority a moving to work agency? If so, my conversation can look like this. If not, do they have any special purpose vouchers that we could work together on to house foster youth? It's really like those two pathways that you can take. And they do look very different. So just kind of like educating yourself a little bit about who your local housing authority is, I think will be very helpful.
Yeah. So with that, and we may have already covered this, but let me just ask the question, Nancy and Maria, I'm asking you guys, what do you think are keys, which you just described, Nancy, to building successful, partnerships, which leads to outcomes, right, for our students, right, around meaningful university partnerships over the last number of years, in your region? I mean, Maria just pointed to some things, and you pointed to some things. Is there anything that we're missing, you think, that would be important to approaching, as you just said? And I think conversely, I want to say this to some of the housing authorities, right? That may be on, that maybe you give thought as well to approaching some of the local institutions, right? Whether universities or colleges that may not be on this call, they may not even be aware this even exists, right? We know that the great majority of our universities around the country right now have no idea this conversation is even taking place. So maybe you may be encouraged to reach out as well, so that it works two ways. So Nancy, any thoughts around that, around partnership?
I think, yeah, everything that we've been mentioning so far. So, just kind of starting that initial conversation, reaching out to them. Some we're a public housing authority that really does make a lot of community connections. We work really closely with all of our different organizations. We work with all of our higher education institutions. So that's kind of part of our DNA, but not all housing authorities may be like that. Some are a little bit more insular. Some are kind of like they just keep to themselves. So you'll have to kind of knock on their front door. So
Right.
Every housing authority is a little bit different. I also think that kind of the climate in your area might also help one way or another. In San Diego, it's taken years, but it's pretty common knowledge now, and everybody agrees, we have a housing affordability crisis, we have a homelessness crisis, and all of that kind of helps add to the conversation. We have the political will, we have the community support, and all of that kind of helps us with our relationships. So kind of understanding that in your area as well, I think will be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And this is the transition that I was looking for with this panel, which is just really discussing sort of what does next steps look like, which they've been describing, right? Reaching out to your local institutions, but I always say, you got to start within first. Reaching out to those at your campus who have responsibility for supporting at-risk students, marginalized students, and making sure that within the institution, there's an understanding of the data, there's an understanding of the who and the why. And then as an institution now, we're reaching out to our local partners and having those conversations, because it does take all of that. I mean, as Nancy talked about, the political will, the climate, in your region, these conversations that we're having, and the idea that we're coming together to talk about solutions, that's a way around partnering to expand the reach. Again, not framing it as if something's not being done. It's framing it around as partners, right? More hands at the table, we can do more together. And so I think that's just really important. The contact for, again, folks in your campus. The next step is folks in your region. Learn before you contact them. Do they have a moving to work designated agency? Because I'm of the mindset that it's not necessarily one pathway or the other. Maybe there's both. Those pathways can complement each other. One has a little more flexibility. The other one may have more resources. You just don't know until you get in those conversations to see, as Maria pointed out, who do we need to bring in? Make sure we got all the right people at the table to start the conversation and visit them. You got to invest, as I said, $10, which is now $20. $20 at Starbucks now, but you got to make the investment to get to know folks. And then lastly, I do want to say, I want to be a resource as well. If I can help in any which way, you can call me, you can email me, just let me know. But you got to give me a Coke and a smile, okay? You got to give me a smile, got to give me a Coca-Cola. I'm here to help and support all of this work. These are all of our students, all of our communities. We're all connected. And so I just want to make sure that our panelists also feel this appreciation, that you feel not just the appreciation from today, but what you did yesterday and what you're going to do on Monday, what you've been doing and what you're going to do, but also for us, giving us time today. So to our audience, people that joined us, I have some idea about their calendars because trying to meet with them together and individually. They are doing the thing. They are doing the thing. These are the people who get it done at a very, very high level. And so I want to say to each of you how much I appreciate you. Every talk time you've given me, cell phones, emails, phone calls, text messages, all of that, how much I appreciate each of you. And so with that, I want to see if there's any last questions. We're going to wrap this up. Our time is coming to an end, but I want to make sure that we ask folks, are there any last questions before we go? I want to make sure you have a chance to get them in. This whole thing is recorded. And so, Caitlin, can you tell them how they can access the recording to share with their teams, with their organizations, with their institutions? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So there will be an email that goes out to everybody who registered for this session, and it will include the recording that it'll be in the form of a YouTube video, along with all of the amazing links that have been shared in the chat during today's talk, and then a few other resources for you guys as well.
Yeah, thank you. So just in case you confuse me and Jeree, I'm just saying, I'm Reggie. That's Jeree over there, because they get us confused all the time, Jeree. I'm just saying. So my last thank you to all of you for making time today. I appreciate you. It does take a community. It takes a village, right? To do this work effectively, and the direction we're going in and things we're trying to get in terms of outcomes and completions and things, it's really gonna take all of us to think a little bit different, to be a little bit different, to be a little more open. And we want every voice at the table. We want everybody to feel included in this conversation. So thank you again, Maren, Maria, Jeree, Nancy. Appreciate you. Appreciate you bringing what you bring. And to Caitlin and Cheryl, whew, it'll make me get a tear in my eye when I think about what you do all the time. And for Bobby, who provided some welcome remarks earlier. Have a good rest of the day. For those of you in California, it's not even afternoon yet. So let's get it going. We got more work to do in California. And the rest of y'all are starting to wrap it up. Have a great weekend. Know that you are appreciated and a valued member of this tribe, okay? Take care, you guys. Have a good weekend. Bye.